And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This is episode number 73 we got coming at you this week. It's going to be about Watergate, and boy, is it going to be about Watergate. Gonna learn a lot about Watergate. I have watched so many movies and documentaries about this stuff. I'm just it's coming out of my pores. But before we get there, as always, a little bit of housekeeping before we hop into the episode 7 days a week. You can find out how things happen over at hdthappen.com. There you'll find all the episode transcripts as well as pictures and videos from many of the episodes that kind of show you where I get the information from. All the socials are over at HDTHappen. Pretty much just Twitter and Instagram. That Instagram is still looking pretty tired, so pretty much just Twitter if we're going to be honest with you. Let's see, what am I watching? What am I watching right now? Well, basically, just Watergate stuff. I could put you on some really good Watergate movies. I mean, of course, All the President's Men. What else did I watch? There was a movie, The Pentagon Papers. It's just called The Pentagon Papers, but it's about, you guessed it, The Pentagon Papers. And let's see, then there was another one called Mark Felt, which is about the guy who ended up giving all the secrets of the Watergate investigation over to the Washington Post. They could then publish it, which is kind of what, All the President's Men is about, but it's from the guy's perspective, from the Deep Throat, from his perspective. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's much else to say. I just kind of want to hop into it. There's a lot of dense information to get to with this stuff. It takes on a mind of its own. As always, like and subscribe wherever you're hearing this. Give us 5 stars if you liked it, 2 stars if you didn't. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. Always thank you guys for coming back and pressing play week to week. Was it last week we did the mini episode? It was on James Earl Jones. Found out he was an Army Ranger. Pretty wild. Like I said, that's like if we found out that Morgan Freeman was a Navy SEAL. You never know the kind of lives that these guys live. But yeah, definitely give that a check out. That was our 30th person we've done. Got a few changes I think I want to kind of make to the people that we cover in Bite-Sized Bios. That's a whole different story for another time. So yeah, I think before we get to the episodes or anything else I wanted to say, I don't think so. So yeah, without further ado, as we're known to do, here is the episode. Okay, so for this week's edition of Breaking Old News, I think I've maybe found the vein for this segment. I'm usually, for the last couple ones I've done, it's been about, the subject matter has been about the same stuff that the episode is on, so I'm kind of do the same thing here again. We're going to talk about a suicide that happened in basically conjunction with Watergate. It had to do with Watergate. I don't think it's talked about very often, talked about enough, but there was a U.S. representative who killed himself basically because he had kind of been found out to have been associated with the Watergate scandal. And so basically, how can I put this? U.S. Representative William O. Mills was found shot to death at his home today. Apparently a suicide. I'm reading this from the Golden Transcript, volume 106. Number 112. This is May 24th, 1973. And the Maryland, I'm reading straight from the paper. The Maryland Republican's death came one day after the Washington Post reported that he had received a $25,000 contribution from secret funds of President Nixon's 1972 campaign finance committee. The contributions were not reported to the Maryland Board of Election in an apparent violation of state law. When asked if Mills had shot himself, his aide, Jack Shawn, replied, "Yes, from all indications," end quote. The body of the 48-year-old congressman was found in a barn at his Mulberry Hill farm in Talbot County near Washington. Now, that's pretty much that. But I mean, you never know. I had no idea that there had been a guy who had committed suicide from basically being found out that he had been given some money from what I'm imagining is also they said it differently here, but they committed to re-elect the president. What I wonder even more though, once you read it, and you know about the dirty stuff that these guys have talked about and been found guilty of, I wonder if he wasn't murdered. I'll be honest. I don't want to, just stir up some old stuff. But the only reason I say that is because they said he died of a gunshot wound to the chest at close range. Now, I don't know, but that's not how you would think that a man would have committed suicide with a gun. Gunshot range. Let me read specifically from the paper because this is what got me. The Easton Memorial Hospital said he had a gunshot wound in the left lower chest. David Thackeray, a hospital spokesman said there were powder burns on Mills' shirt, indicating he had been shot at close range. So this guy shot himself in the left lower chest? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying when you find out that, because I would say what even more is because some of these guys in the White House plumbers, who knows what they've done. I mean, they all have probably, not all of them, but some of them have probably killed some people. And there was even some anecdotes that had talked about, some of them were even talking about going to kill other parts of other scandals that they were trying to cover up. I think specifically there was a guy that I think they said Liddy had almost talked about trying to kill a journalist who had put out a story about some funds from this lobbyist from this company who was going to go public, but they had toyed with the idea of killing the journalist, and they said he was down for it. So I mean, when you hear that, and then you find out that a U.S. representative was committed suicide by shooting himself in the lower left chest after being reported to the Washington Post that he received money from Nixon, I'm just saying, I don't know, the web, it just continues to just spread. But that's been this week's episode of Breaking Old News. You can decide for yourself. Let's get on with the episode. The story I'm about to tell you has a lot of twists and turns that are hard to follow sometimes. And it took me quite a bit of research and understanding to kind of draw the conclusions I'm about to present to you. But I hope that you can understand it as well as I feel like I do. Multiple cabinet officials would face criminal charges related to the scandal that is Watergate. An FBI director would resign, face prosecution. A congressman would die by suicide, and a CIA director would plead guilty to misleading Congress. All in all, I think almost 70 people would be indicted for charges that kind of relate to the Watergate scandal. Now, before we get to Watergate, before we get to that specific instance, we, of course, as is customary on this podcast, have to go back before we go forward. And I feel like the story truly starts with the Pentagon Papers. Now, I had no real idea what they were before this. I knew that I'd heard them before. I mean, the alliteration is there. Pentagon Papers, it sounds, it's fun to say, even if you don't know what it is. But what it truly is its official title is the Report of the Office of the Secretary of Defense Vietnam Task Force. And it was basically a study that was instituted by the Department of Defense that kind of details America's political and military involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. And this is important because it would get out to the public, and the public would realize that basically America had been lying to them about the Vietnam War for upwards of 20 years. This story, of course, was released by a man named Daniel Ellsberg, who had actually helped create the study. He wrote on the Pentagon Papers for a while and was actually very ingrained. He was basically one of those guys who was behind the scenes that was trying to help America win the war. If you look, there's a great movie entitled also Pentagon Papers, where he works for the Rand Corporation. He ends up going to work for the White House. I think the White House sends him to Vietnam, embeds him into like the actual fighting, and that's where he, in an effort to have him figure out how to win and end the war. While he's over there, he sees the atrocities that are being committed by the Americans and how the war is basically unwinnable. comes back and writes as such, but that never gets published. That never gets brought to the American public. The papers themselves, they were about 7,000 pages, I believe, 47 volumes, just a huge amount of information. And what he would do was he would sneak these out of the Pentagon and make copies of them. Well, excuse me, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me go back. He had been given a copy from the Pentagon. He had them actually when he was back working at the Rand Corporation. He had them in a safe in the office there, and from there he would take the pages out and go photocopy them, and that's what actually became the published Pentagon Papers that kind of changed. I wouldn't say it changed the minds of everyone who had a feeling about the Vietnam War, because that was already kind of a thing. People were already not feeling very positive about it, but it kind of just continued to stoke the fear and show the reality of, that America was in a losing war, and what had been at that point the longest war that we have dealt with. And so Ellsberg, of course, he approaches the New York Times to release the papers, but the Department of Justice put a stop to their publication in the interest of national security. This issue would actually get taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court would end up siding with Ellsberg, and the papers would then be published. Now, I say all of this. You wonder why is this where the story begins? We're talking about Watergate. We're talking about Nixon. We're talking about breaking into a hotel. Well, before we get there, the people who actually did that, they did other jobs. And their first job was on the Pentagon Papers. Their first job was to break into the psychiatrist's office break into the office of the psychiatrist who was treating Daniel Ellsberg. And I couldn't quite get a full beat onto what the specifics of what they were looking for. I wasn't sure if it was for just to know that he was talking about the Pentagon Papers, or if it was to kind of get information on his life to kind of discredit him. I think it was probably the latter. But that was the first thing they ever did. And these men, like I said, they were called the White House plumbers. And they were called this because they were said to plug leaks, if you will. And they would end up, from that point forward, kind of doing a number of different jobs in the name of the Nixon administration. Now, there were a bunch of guys who were kind of floating around in power and who would kind of call the shots for this team, but it was all set to supposedly come back to Nixon. And then one of the movies that I watched, so they did this on purpose. They did it so that it would be as confusing as it was, because basically these guys were getting paid out of what was called a slush fund that was related to the Committee to Re-elect the President, acronym CREEP, if you want to get deep. But so that wasn't directly connected to the president himself. But of course, I mean, obviously, why wouldn't the president have like direct knowledge of things that are happening in the committee that is trying to re-elect him? So later on, they kind of parse it out to come down to who gave the orders and what the president did and did not know. I mean, depending on who you are, I'm sure you have your own opinions. I firmly believe that anybody who's in control and in power and it has, I would say, final say. I realize there's people, that when you work in those big machines that have so many people that work with them, you can't always say who's doing what, but you have an idea of the tone and the integrity of your office. And what I will say from watching and doing so much research, nobody in this administration was trying to do the right thing. Actually, I laughed out loud because I watched one documentary in which I believe it was the deputy chief of staff for Nixon's first administration. And I forget his name, but he literally said, he's like, we didn't even think about telling the truth. Like, that wasn't even on their radar. They're not even trying to be truthful. This is all about, all of this entire thing is really all about trying to maintain power. But no, so let's go back a little bit. We got the Pentagon Papers. We got the White House plumbers. The White House plumbers come on the scene because of the Pentagon Papers. And the Pentagon Papers end up getting released, I believe it is in 71. And what's crazy is all of this happens. There's so many things that happen between, I want to say, like 68 and 72. Basically just the entire Nixon first administration that just, I think, that none of them could have happened without one another. So these White House plumbers, sometimes called the plumbers, sometimes called the Room 16 Project, or more officially the White House Special Investigations Unit. They were a covert White House unit that was actually created during the week of the publication of the Pentagon Papers, right in 71, right around the same time as the Pentagon Papers became a thing. So did they. They weren't very successful, truthfully. and a lot of the stuff that they did. I mean, let's be honest, we're only talking about them because they got caught. And even the times that they didn't get caught, they weren't like I said, they weren't very successful. They didn't get anything when they broke into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. It took them multiple break-ins to get into the Watergate Hotel, and the times that they did, they got caught with that too. And even the men who were working on that, as we'll see, we're about to break down the members. Some of them were from the Bay of Pigs, CIA stuff that was going on back in the 50s, in the 60s as well. So the name of the plumbers, let's see, we got several guys here. We got Frank Sturgis, we got E. Howard Hunt, James McCord. He's a big one. We'll get to him later. Let's see, Charles Colson. I believe it's Liddy. Is it Gordon or George? I forget. I want to say it's Gordon Liddy. Maybe it's George though. It's got a G. There's so many names. So many names, but I'll try to keep it together for you guys. So yeah, that was some of the White House plumbers, just to name a few. There was a great show on Max, I believe now, that kind of goes into it. I wouldn't say great. Great's not a good word for it. It's an okay show. It gets better with time. The first episode is a little touch and go, if we're going to be completely honest. But let's get back onto it. So we'll kind of come back to the White House plumbers, of course, because they're the ones, like I said, who end up going into the actual hotel itself. But let's get to the Watergate. Let's talk about the Watergate Hotel. So the Watergate area is bounded on the north by Virginia Avenue, and on the east by New Hampshire Avenue, and on the south by F Street, and on the west by Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway, which is runs along the Potomac River. It's in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood next to the Kennedy Center and the Saudi Arabian Embassy. It used to be, I believe it was natural gas. Let's see, there used to be, for a long time, the land was occupied by the Watergate complex, the gas works of Washington Gas Light Company. They did a mixture of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, methane, all that good stuff for heating, cooking. Yeah, so it was a big gas production area, but they stopped making gas there. We're getting natural gas from there in 1947. So the plant was demolished not too long after that. And that is when they start to build the hotel, right around the 50s. I wanted to know also where the name comes from, the name Watergate, because it's something that everybody kind of knows, but you never think about, like, because when they made Watergate, they didn't know it was going to be Watergate. And it's still Watergate now, but it's not Watergate. It's not the scandal. It's just the name. So the name relates to, and we'll find there's a number of different people who think they know where the name came from. It relates to the numerous aspects of its physical and historical context. The complex sits near the eastern terminus of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, which is now historical parks. Could be one of the reasons. In 2018, a man named Joseph Rodota, he wrote a book called The Watergate, Inside America's Most Infamous Address, and he gives 3 accounts. Like I said, no one knows, really. He gives 3 accounts as to where the name actually came from. He says a playwright named Warren Adler came up with it while working as a publicist for the developers. Maybe a man named Nicholas Salgo, who was a New York financier, he suggested it. But this is the one that, to me, I think actually makes the most sense. So in 2009, a guy named William Noble wrote a book called Presidential Power on Trial. And he says that Watergate got its name from overlooking the gate that regulated the flow of water from the Potomac River into the tidal basin at flood tide. That makes the most sense. I think the rest of it is just ridiculous. We're just going to go with that. And so that, now that we have a little bit of the history of the hotel and the building, not much. There's not much. I mean, it's a hotel to me. And also executive offices. That's the part that I also as a kid could not understand. When they were like, oh, it's a hotel. I'm like, then why were people working there? But then the older you get, you realize that a lot of hotels also they do that. They also have executive working spaces. The big ones do. Like, this is how they make more money. I think you can charge more for commercial space in some cases than like a regular hotel room, so it kind of makes sense. So that will bring us now to the actual scandal itself. And I think in order to fully understand, I think the scandal, you have to know the times, which I'm not going to go into very, very deep at all. But I will say, this is, of course, when Richard Nixon is the president. He became president in 1968, and he would win again in 1972. And particularly the Watergate break-ins happened in 1972. and it is the year of his reelection, which is why if you watch a lot of stuff throughout, or like movies and stuff or documentaries, they will relate the time for Watergate in like days to the reelection. And that's, like I said, the entire point of this is all this is being done by the committee to reelect the president. Let's not get lost in that. It's not done by some rogue group. That's neither here nor there, but it's definitely something to remember. This is all because in the end, like I watched some of the Frost Nixon interviews, where Nixon gets interviewed and he's talking about his time in the White House, and he has this whole idea that none of this was his fault, that he basically admits to doing what everyone knows that he did, which is, we have you on tape, bro. We know you did it. But he says it's all about his emotional thought process. It's about how he felt and what his goals were in trying to do whatever he did. So it's, you know what I mean? That's literally why he breaks it down. I watched it for a long time and tried to figure out how he really felt about it. And he basically admits to, I did all the stuff that y'all think I did. I definitely admitted to paying off, these burglars, which we'll get into, and just being aware of all the different things that the plumbers were doing throughout their time. But his idea is that he wasn't doing it to stop a violent or criminal act. It was all done in the idea of political theater. Basically, it's all done in the sphere of politics, and which he's not wrong, right? He's not completely wrong, because all of this was done because they say he was insecure and didn't think he would win re-election, which is wild. Because he, I think, won in 1972 by the largest margin of victory, I think, in the history of presidential elections. I'm not 100% sure if that's true, but I've heard that numerous times. It was just a landslide against, I believe his name was George McGovern. Dude was from South Dakota. The guy that he went against was from South Dakota. I'm like, we would never do that. That would never happen now. Sorry, South Dakota, if anyone's listening from there, but you're not going to be our next national leader. I just don't think that's the case. But yeah, we kind of stirred a little bit away from the actual thing. Let's go back to the actual Watergate scandal. Like I said, I wanted to give you an idea. I wanted to give you an idea of what was going on in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. The Vietnam War was an issue. There was a lot going on, but Nixon himself was very unsure of whether or not he was going to be able to come back for his second term. Like he would. So that's what all of this. Truthfully, I do believe that's the root of all of it. So the scandal stemmed from Nixon's administration's persistent attempts to cover up their involvement in the burglary of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Washington, D.C. Watergate office building. And so what's interesting is, evidently, if you look into it, the plumbers were planning and had created a number of different plans for trying to sabotage and or gain information from the Democrats. They had a number of different things that involved hippies, involved prostitutes. They had, a plan where they were gonna get these prostitutes and have some of the Democratic National Committee members, have a good time with them, and then get that videotaped and I think use it to blackmail them, or basically release and show how debaucherous they are. They had multiple plans. I think that's what people don't realize, and is one thing that I think is one of the larger takeaways from all of this, just in the sense of it wasn't just a fluke, or it wasn't just we put all our eggs in this basket. This hotel means a lot to us. It really didn't. It was just one thing that they chose to do, and one thing that history remembers. The actual name of it, I believe what they called it was Project Opal. It's actually what they were doing. That's the name of the project that they were working on when they were trying to get in and out of the Watergate Hotel. And the whole point of it really was, they went in, I think, twice out of the 4 times they tried, I want to say, and they were bugging people's offices. They were bugging the phones in different places in there of 2 specific people. I want to say one guy's name was O'Brien. And I forget the other guy's name, but I think I have it here. I'll probably mention it a little bit later. But that was kind of the whole thing. And so they would go back in, and when they went back in, that's when trouble kind of ensued. That's the break-in that we know of, is when they were coming back in to fix the bugs and to also continue to look for other stuff. That's the one they got caught with. That's the one people saw the flashlights. That's what we're going to get into right now. What happened the night of the break-in? I feel like that's what I wanted to know when I started looking at this. And I just went into this. There's so much. This thing is a spider web. But we're going to talk specifically right now about the actual night. So, 2 phones inside the DNC headquarters offices were said to have been wiretapped. Right. One phone belonged to Robert Spencer Oliver, and the other belonged to O'Brien. Now, at the time, Oliver was working as the executive director of the Association of the State Democratic Chairman, and Brian was also there as well. First name Larry. And so the FBI found no evidence that O'Brien's phone was actually bugged, and that could have been because they messed it up or they took it out and were trying to replace it before, or they got caught before they could replace it. But basically, that's, like I said, that's what they were there for. And so on that night, security guard Frank Willis, who worked the midnight to 7 a.m. shift as the security guard of the Watergate office building, he noticed some tape on the door to try to get into the actual, I think, through the parking garage. Which was pretty normal, actually. And this is what the kind of messed up part is that the workers would do that. He knew that. So the first time he saw it, he wasn't actually, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. But he came back later on. They forgot to take it off the second time. He came back and saw it, I think, later on, and he knew that the workers were already gone. So then he was like, okay, so now someone's actually trying to break in. And he actually has these entries. They have pictures of his log. And then I think I'll probably end up putting it on the website. There's amazing how much evidence there is. But right around 2 a.m., he saw this and called the D.C. police. And so the officers who responded to the call, there were 3 plainclothes guys named Sergeant Paul Leeper, Officer John Barrett, and Officer Carl Schaffler. And they were working the overnight bum squad. They were dressed as hippies and on the lookout for drug deals and other street crimes. And that's interesting. And so basically these guys, the cops came in, they caught them. They go to jail as burglars. Now, what really throws people off, or what really makes this, from what I understand, this is the point when everyone kind of perk their ears up, is when they go to their arraignment the next morning. And the judge talks to them, and they're, normally in an arraignment, you're being made aware of the charges against you, yada, 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 stuff like that, lawyers, all that good stuff. And the judge asks, the workers, the burglars, what they do for a living. And as we've mentioned, some of the guys literally worked for the CIA, and they told him that. He said, "I used to work for the." I think it was Howard Hunt who was there. I'm not 100% sure. There's so many names, but one of them, either that or Liddy. I think Liddy was for the FBI. I could have him switched though. But he tells them, "Yeah, I worked for the CIA for like 14, 15 years." And that gets into the paper. The Post is there. The Washington Post is there. These guys, they see that and they write about it. And that's when everyone knows this is more than just larceny. This is more than this is more than just a break-in. This is, if former CIA is breaking into the Democratic National Committee's office, this is a little bit more than just nothing. And now, granted, and what we'll find is that this really became, and I think still to a small degree, is what some people will call a nothing burger, in the sense of like media and how it was kind of taken, I think, over time, because the America would end up not caring about this. In this large scheme of things, when it happened, America did not care, and they mentioned that in multiple movies and documentaries. I mean, I think they said only 48% of the entire nation at the time, up until I think Nixon's resignation, knew that Watergate was even a thing. That's why, like I said, all this happened, and they covered it up, and he went on to win, by the largest margin of victory ever. You just wonder how insecure this guy really was. I mean, if people liked him or not. It's pretty wild that you would think that people don't like you that much, and then it turns out they love, or at least they like the version that you present to them. I don't know. So yeah, that's the night. That's what all of this. I wouldn't say it's what all of it comes down to, but it's definitely the part that created the Watergate scandal that then just takes on legs of its own. You find out there's so much more into it, including, the releasing of all the information after the fact. Deep Throat. We're gonna talk about Deep Throat here in a second. But before I get to that, I want to tell you another interesting offshoot of this story, and it is about the kidnapping of Martha Mitchell. Now, Martha Mitchell is the wife of John Mitchell. John Mitchell was the Attorney General of America up until right around 1972, in which he, at that time, resigned and then became the campaign manager for the Committee for the Reelection of the President. There goes that name again. Like I said, everything is done through the Committee for the Reelection of the President. Basically, they're just like you could say however you want to say it. They're like the mob, like end, the mob arm of Nixon's. If you need something done, we go to Creep. Creep gets it done. Now, remember I said McCord earlier, one of the White House plumbers. He was important, at least in this story. He is, because Martha Mitchell knows McCord, Mr. McCord. He actually used to drive her children, John's children as well, to school. So she knew, she knew him very well. And then John Mitchell knew the Attorney General, the former Attorney General. He knew that if she saw his name in the paper, about being one of the burglars, that she would, go off and, probably tell a lot of people, things that he really didn't want her to know, because she already had a big mouth. She's already being interviewed. She was a personality, if you will. Maybe not a big mouth. I mean, she was talked quite a bit. Very many interviews out there that she's done. And so he's trying to keep that from happening. He knew that because my wife talks a lot, and she knows that she knows this guy, can't have that happen. So what happens is, I think like 2 days after the burglary, she gets arrested, or she gets kidnapped by some FBI agents, literally, by like 5 dudes. And goes crazy, ends up getting I think they shoot her up with like some sort of drug to like knock her out. I mean, they supposedly kick and beat her, from what she says. I mean, this is wild. They sedate her. She was given some medicine by a psychiatrist. And then, I mean, they let her go not too long after that. But I mean, she ends up living. She ends up divorcing that guy, I'm pretty sure. Her and John Mitchell are no longer together. But it's just crazy, so many different parts. I mean, like we've already discussed at this point. I mean, the suicide from the congressman that may or may not have been a suicide. It's remarkable how there's so many different facets and pieces to a hotel office break-in. The world didn't know much about Watergate, or didn't care much about Watergate for, I would say, I don't know, until probably the Washington Post made it a thing. And of course, that what their endeavors were made famous in the movie All the President's Men, which I've seen a couple times in research of this podcast. And one of the larger characters in that overall story is what they call Deep Throat. Now, Deep Throat is a pseudonym that was given to the secret informant who provided information in 1972 to Bob Woodward, who in turn shared it with Carl Bernstein. These are the two reporters who worked at the Washington Post and kind of made the story famous. If you know about Watergate, it's probably because of what they did. And so basically what would happen, Bob Woodward would meet this guy, Deep Throat, in a parking garage in Reston, Virginia, and they would just tell him what's going on, but kind of make him, he was giving him little tidbits and making Woodward and Bernstein kind of work to figure out the rest. And then that through their conversations, they were able to actually, bring down the people that were involved in the Watergate scandal, which of course we said was the White House plumbers and the Committee to Re-elect the President. There's so many different names within that, and I think we're going to kind of go into at the very end just to kind of lay out who got what, who was in trouble. But I mean, of course, we're talking about people like E. Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy, John Dean, Ehrlichman, people like that who would end up, kind of seeing a little bit of justice. I mean, no one really, people went to jail for this, but not as much. And I looked it up. I don't have the numbers on me right now, but I think I am going to do it towards the end just to know, it's worth mentioning the kind of trouble they got into, but not as much, because these guys were just out here, like I said earlier, nobody was doing the right thing. Nobody. I mean, even, it's a quick tangent, but even the vice president had to resign. Spiro Agnew had to resign because he had taken money from some people, I think when he was the governor of Maryland, and kept taking money even when he was still a vice president due to some business that they had done together. And he was like the first president to have to resign in like 150 years. Like, this entire administration was just like, I don't know what's crazy. I mean, even down to when John Mitchell got confirmed as the attorney general. I think he was, Nixon was said to ask that he not have to go through a background check process. I mean, it's like, what, dude? Like, what? How was nobody here? How was everybody here a criminal? That's what I couldn't figure out. Like, everybody here was down to do some dirt. Nobody, it's all in the name of patriotism. It's all, we're all love America, and we're all down to do some dirt in our name, or, because we love America. Everyone's a spy. It's crazy. I mean, even down to, great point, down to Deep Throat. We come to find out, this is wild, Deep Throat was the former associate director of the FBI, Mark Felt. That's Deep Throat. But we don't find that out for 30 years after the Washington Post. At this time, even when they published it, but we find that, of course, some people knew, and even in the 80s and 90s, and it was even speculated, I think, in the mid-70s that it was Mark Felt. People talked about it. People aren't dumb. But it was never confirmed until 2005. And there was a great movie out there. I believe it's called Mark Felt. It's called Mark Felt, the man who brought down the White House. But it is all from his perspective, which I thought was a not very talked about perspective. Very often, it's usually told from Nixon's idea or his people, or it's told from the Washington Post, or it's told from like the public's, but it's never told from like the guy who basically did bring down the White House. And you find out, like I was saying before, it's all the stuff that happened in between 68 and 72. J. Edgar Hoover dies in May of 1972. Right? He created the FBI. He was the director of the FBI. He was the guy who made the FBI. He dies in May of 1972. Watergate happens a month later. Now, Deep Throat, Mark Felt, he was basically, he felt as if the FBI did him wrong. He felt as if the FBI did him dirty. He has a story too. Oh my gosh, does he have a story? He thought he was going to be the next director. He thought he was going to be the next director of the FBI. He had served for 30 years in the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he was, I don't know if you know the levels of the FBI. He was number 2 in charge. So when the number 1 dies, he's assuming it's coming down to him. It doesn't. Nixon appoints a guy, L. Patrick Gray. He appoints him to be the new director of the FBI. And so obviously that rubs Mark Felt wrong. Now he's obviously still, that doesn't just mean he's going to go out and start giving secrets at that point, but he notices that Nixon is trying to get the FBI to stop investigating into Watergate. And basically that because L. Patrick Gray was appointed by him, he's trying to get him to basically have that investigation stopped. And he can see that. Mark Felt can see the writing on the wall. He can see that he can see the corruption firsthand. And I think it's that mixed with the fact that he was not given the position, this is my opinion, made him then go and want to start telling secrets. Because I mean, he goes for 30 years without it. He's a company man, he's here for the people. He's here for the FBI, and he still seems to have a love for the FBI, but he doesn't like the way that it's being run. So that's Deep Throat. That's Deep Throat's. That's his motivation. I never knew his motivation, but that's what I think it is. He has his own issues. His daughter runs off to these what do you call them? Not a cult. I wouldn't call it a cult, but cultish. Like she lives in the fields and barefoot having babies and stuff, with these radical people. His wife ends up committing suicide 10 years after the Watergate stuff. It's, it gets rough for him. He actually ends up getting convicted of, how do you put it? Basically of giving out orders for there to be normal people. He was investigating the Weather Underground. And in doing so, he had authorized for the FBI to break into the houses of people that he suspected to be a part of the Weather Underground, to bug them and, find out stuff about them. And that's illegal. You can't just break into people's houses and do that. So he did it for over 170 people. He'd be found guilty of that by a grand jury and then pardoned by Reagan. This happened in 1980. So not too long after he was found guilty, they were just nah, don't worry about it. But so that's all still Mark Felt. It's all still Deep Throat. It's I'm telling you, man, it's this stuff just goes on. Let's see. What more can I say about that before we move on to another part? Oh yeah, so Woodward claimed that he would signal Deep Throat that he desired a meeting by moving a flower pot with a red flag on the balcony of his apartment. And then when Deep Throat wanted a meeting with him, he would make special marks on page 20 of Woodward's copy of the New York Times, and he would circle the page number and draw clock hands to indicate the hour. I mean, real spy stuff. Like I said, they often met on the bottom level of an underground garage just over the Key Bridge, and is actually located, I believe, it's at 1401 Wilson Boulevard, and it's still there now. I think it was almost going to be demolished, but I think it was given one of those historical markers. And the owner of the garage, I think they're going to still keep it. It's still now there. I think as of 2022, it is still there. Okay, so that is, I would say, can't even you can never say that's it. That's all, but definitely not. There's so much to this story, to this entire scandal. But I would say that's the majority of it. What I think we'll cover now, one of the last few things we'll cover is just who got jail time, and what happened to those people, because that's, I think, important as well. We find out about all these crimes that they committed, who actually went to jail. So there's a number of different people who ended up getting a little bit of jail time, and now there's what's been called the Watergate 7, which can kind of refer to two different sets of people. I think in all, there's about, give or take, about 14 people ended up kind of getting some jail time here. So of course we got Gordon Liddy. He was one of the White House plumbers. He would end up being sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison. Served 4.5. Howard Hunt, he was the guy, like I said, who was in the CIA. He was the guy, I believe, like I said, when the judge asked him, what do you do for a living? He was the guy who used to work for the CIA. That's when everybody was like, whoa, this is more than nothing. He would be sentenced to 2.5 to 8 years, but ended up actually serving 33 months in prison, so just under 3 years in prison. Howard Hunt did. Liddy did 4.5. Let's see. Some of the Cuban guys who were also in the plumbers, Virgilio Gonzalez. Let's see, he did 13 months in prison. Eugenio Martinez, he did 15 months in prison. He got pardoned by Ronald Reagan. Interesting who Ronald Reagan chose to pardon and who he didn't. Let's see, McCord, James McCord, the guy we said who was kind of involved with the reason for the kidnapping of Martha Mitchell. He would end up serving 4 months in prison. Let's see if there's anybody else worth mentioning. John Mitchell, the former Attorney General, he would end up serving 19 months in prison. Pretty wild. He was sentenced from 2.5 to 8 years and got reduced to 1 to 4, but ended up serving 19. I had no idea that we had an Attorney General who went to prison. But I mean, if it's on the Nixon administration, I can believe it now. I mean, like I said, everyone that he around him was a criminal, and that's why I think it's funny. I think I'm gonna play that at the beginning. The I'm not a crook speech. It's like maybe you weren't, buddy, but everybody you associated with was. So it kind of makes you a crook. Let's see, John Ehrlichman. He was the former assistant to Nixon, in charge of domestic affairs. He served 18 months in prison. I mean, all these guys. If you were around Nixon back in the 70s, you probably went to jail. But Nixon, of course, had to resign. I will play a little bit of his resignation speech here for you right now.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. As I recall the high hopes for America with which we began this second term, I feel a great sadness that I will not be here in this office working on your behalf to achieve those hopes in the next 2.5 years. But in turning over direction of the government to Vice President Ford, I know, as I told the nation when I nominated him for that office 10 months ago, that the leadership of America will be in good hands.
And of course, that resignation would happen in 1974. And of course, that will mean Gerald Ford will become the president. Of course, Spiro Agnew, like I said, could have become the president had he not have had to resign for his own issues with just breaking the law. Like I said, everybody here was just breaking the law. But yeah, that's pretty much the aftermath. Like I said, people went to jail 2-3 years. I'm not sure what's a suitable punishment, truthfully, for this kind of stuff, because it depends on how you look at it. I've watched a lot of stuff, and it's like, yeah, they're breaking the law, but it's like it's all just infighting. It's all just political infighting is really what it is. Like, I mean, there's some stuff that happens outside of it, but I mean, it's more like collateral damage than anything that's actually like them. I don't want to, but you almost kind of do want to side with Nixon a little bit. It's like nothing was so super criminal. It's just a bunch of white collar crime after white collar crime, covering up more stuff. It's I don't know. I still got some processing to do on this, honestly, because I've watched so much stuff on Watergate that I'm sure after a week I'm gonna take a break now. I'm gonna take a break and I'll watch it, and we'll reconvene with the mini episode. I'm sure I have more to say on that once I've had a chance to think about it. But yeah, I believe that's gonna be it for this episode. All right, so that was another episode of How Did That Happen? I mean, how did that happen? I really hope we figured it out. I really hope we got to the bottom of Watergate. That's all I've been thinking about this entire past week, because I've been watching all these documentaries, is just trying to figure out just the whole thing. And I mean, it's a multi-sided, multifaceted just incident that just continues to spread. The more you think you understand it, the more you think you've contained the idea of the hotel office break-in, it just becomes something else. I mean, it has to do with kidnappings and suicides, and the FBI, the CIA, all of this stuff. It's interesting to say the least. And I hope you guys found it the same way. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I toyed with the idea of there being a part 2. I don't know. I think like I said, there will definitely be more to cover on the mini episode next week. So look for that. If we don't get to the whole part 2 part of it, there's just so much. But yeah, always thank you guys for pressing play. As always, give us a like and subscribe wherever you find this. 5 stars if you loved it. Really hope you did. 2 stars if you didn't. Tell us why you didn't, because constructive criticism is always welcome. We definitely appreciate it. Is there anything else to say before we get out of here? I don't think so. So yeah, see you next week with the next Bite Size Bio.